Today's true crime video is going to be the Jacob Wetterling case, and I have to give a trigger warning and a content warning because today's case is very sad. It involves the death of a child and the abuse of a child. So please click away if that is going to be too much for you, okay? So, I'm thinking of anything I have to say before we begin. I don't think so, but I just wanted to say thank you all for your continued support and comments. I see every one of them and I very much appreciate them. So if my content interests you, please consider liking, subscribing, or leaving a comment. Thank you so much. And we will go ahead and jump right into today's case. So Jacob Wetterling was born on February 17th, 1978 in St. Joseph's, Minnesota. His parents were named Patty and Jerry, and he had 3 siblings whose names were Carmen, Amy, and Trevor. St. Joseph's was a very small town that only had about 2,500 people, which is a very small town, and it was described as a close-knit community. And it was also considered a very safe community where kids roamed freely and people did not lock their doors. It was even said that the police chief did not even usually carry his gun. And the Wetterlings lived on the outskirts of town. They lived on a cul-de-sac, but they did not have close neighbors. They were surrounded by a lot of woods and trees and stuff like that. So, Jacob was in 6th grade at the time of the crime, and he was described as a very respectful, sweet kid. He played hockey and basketball, and he loved watching football. His favorite food was steak, and his favorite color was blue. So he was just a normal, ordinary middle school boy. The day of the crime, October 22nd of 1989, was just like any other day. It was actually a very good day. Jacob and his dad woke up early to go fishing, and then they came home to watch the Vikings versus the Detroit Lions football game. After this football game, they went ice skating together. After that, Patty and Jerry, the parents, had a dinner to go to, as they were invited to a dinner party with some of their friends that evening, which was about 20 miles away from the Wetterling house. They were not planning on being out late, so they allowed the children to stay home alone. The oldest child, which was their daughter Amy, was at a friend's house for the night. So they did not have school the next day, and the other kids were Carmen, who was 8, Trevor, who was 10, and Jacob, who was 11. Jacob had his friend Aaron over, and they ate pizza. Later on, they decided that they wanted to watch a movie. brother, Trevor, suggested that they ask their dad instead. So they called their dad, and the dad agreed and said that they could not be gone long, and he told them to bring a flashlight. The boys left their little sister Carmen with a neighbor who was a family friend, and they started the 15-minute bike ride to Tom Thumb. On the way, they heard some rustling in the grass beside them, but they didn't think anything of it. And by the way, all three boys went, so it was Trevor, Jacob, and Aaron that went on this bike ride. So they go to Tom Thumb, and they rent the movie The Naked Gun, and they start the journey back home. It was very dark by then, and there were no lights in the area since this was a very rural area. Rural. I can't say that word. So it was very dark. The only light that they had was the light of their flashlights. So the Wetterling driveway was a gravel driveway, and it was a very long driveway. And at the beginning of the driveway, when they first got home, the three boys were stopped by a man who had a black mask on, and he was dressed in all black. He told the boys that he had a gun, and he commanded that they lay their bikes down in the ditch and get in the ditch and lay face down. At first, the boys thought that this was just a prank, and then he asked Trevor how old he was. Trevor told the man his age, to which the man instructed him to leave into the woods and run. And he said that if he looked back, then he would be shot. So Trevor complied. He then asked Jacob and Aaron the same questions. And he started to grope Jacob, and he instructed Aaron to follow Trevor into the woods and not look back. So Aaron complied. And by the time the two boys had run a good distance and looked back, Jacob and the man were gone. This was around 9:20 p.m., and unfortunately, this was the last time that Jacob was ever seen alive. When Trevor and Aaron went to the neighbor's house to get Carmen, they told the neighbor what happened. She went next door to her own father's house, who called Patty and told her that Jacob was gone and that they needed to come home immediately. After he got off the phone with them, he called the police, and he was trying to explain what happened. He then put Trevor on the phone with the dispatcher, since Trevor had been there. Trevor told the dispatcher that the man had a raspy voice and was short and stocky. Jacob was last seen wearing a hockey jacket that said police department on it. When officers arrived at the house, they questioned the boys, and they thought the boys were lying actually, which is just sick. So they assumed that Jacob had either run away and that the boys were trying to cover for him, or they thought that the boys had been messing around with their parents' gun or something, accidentally shot Jacob, and were trying to cover this up. But the boys convinced them that they were serious, and so a massive search was launched. By about 10:45 p.m. the same night, there was firefighters, helicopters, police, and more on the scene searching. All they found were footprints and tire tracks at the spot Jacob was taken from. So I couldn't find where they really interviewed many people. It doesn't seem like they did many interviews. I'm sorry if you just heard my throat make that noise. But a neighbor did come forward to the police, saw a group of men going through his woodpile. So he called 911 because he assumed they were trying to steal his firewood. The dispatcher informed him that it was actually police who were searching for a missing boy, and so he went outside to meet them and he offered to help. Once the community found out about Jacob's disappearance, several people wanted to help and it became a very widespread ordeal. And it actually became a statewide search. There were thousands of people who really wanted to help bring Jacob home. And it was actually said to be one of the biggest searches for a single missing child in America's history. However, no suspects were found. Several years later, in 2004, a person of interest was named. His name was Dan Rasiah. This man was the neighbor that I just mentioned who had the dog Smokey, who had been barking. So, he was named a person of interest, but nothing really came from it. So, in 2002, a man named John was elected county sheriff, and John vowed to solve the case. He came up with a new theory stating that the abductor took Jacob on foot, which led him back to the neighbor, Dan, saying that he was the most likely suspect, saying that he just mentioned a car in his driveway to cover his own tracks, and that it would make sense since he lived so close. So, another man named Kevin and his girlfriend overheard the police being dispatched to Jacob's abduction on the night of the crime because they were listening on a police scanner. And when they heard this, they were bored, so they decided to go check it out themselves. However, they did not see anything, and it was confirmed to be them, this couple, that pulled into Dan's driveway. Kevin, he told this story a lot. So, in 2003, he was telling this story and a state marshal overheard him. And this state marshal urged him to go tell his story to the police. And so he did, and this explained the car and tire marks. And it explained the person turning around in Dan's driveway. But from this point on, the police spent time trying to build a case against Dan. In June of 2010, June 30th to be exact, FBI and the State Crime Bureau launched a 2-day search of Dan's house and property. They even excavated a part on the back of his property, which was the wood pile. This was a very public search, and Dan's name was ruined in the community and even in the state. He got a lot of criticism, and obviously this ruined his reputation, so he wrote complaints about the bullying from his community, but unfortunately nothing was done about it. So he sued the Stearns County Sheriff's Office, and on the 28th of October in 2015, the police named a new main suspect, Danny Heinrich. He was actually the very first person of interest in this case, but he was quickly dropped as a suspect because nothing came from it. He was later linked to the case through DNA evidence that was found tying him to the abduction of another little boy in the area named Jared. Jared actually survived, and at the time of the abduction, he was 12. He was taken on the 13th of January in 1989, which was just 9 months before Jacob went missing. This happened in Cold Spring, which was very close to the Wetterling house. On the night of Jared's abduction, he was ice skating with his friends, and afterwards they went to dinner. After dinner, he walked home by himself, and Danny stopped him on the side of the road, asking for directions. But before Jared could answer, Danny commanded him to get in the car. So he got in the back seat, and they drove for about 10 minutes before he stopped. Danny then got into the back seat of the car and SA'd Jared. Then he told the little boy to get out of his back seat and run and not look back, or that he would shoot him. He told the little boy that if he told anyone what happened, he would hunt him down and kill him. So, Danny was looked at as a suspect after Jared went to the police, and Danny actually was very compliant. He submitted a DNA sample of his saliva and hair, and he even let the police take one of his car tires for analysis. The police kept an eye on him for weeks and got a warrant to search his parents' house where he was currently living. They found black boots, camo pants, and police scanners. They also found 2 photos that he had taken. One was of a boy in his underwear, and the other was of a boy in a bath towel coming out of the shower. However, he apparently got away with this. I'm not sure how, but the police let him go due to lack of evidence. Jared ended up moving, but he heard about another string of SAs on young boys from his hometown. So he reached out to these boys, and together they went to the police. The police ended up going back and looking at all of these cases. They still had the clothes that Jared was wearing on the night of his assault, and they matched the DNA samples. They matched the DNA on these clothes to the samples that were given by Danny. But, infuriatingly, by the time they figured this out, the statute of limitations was up on Jared's case, so Danny could not be charged for what he did to Jared, since it had been years. However, the police were able to obtain another search warrant to research Danny's current property. And on the 28th of July in 2015, they found duct tape and handcuffs, as well as VHS tapes full of young boys, if you know what I mean. They also found a young boy's clothing and 19 binders full of child pornography. So, he was charged and spent only a year in prison for these findings. And this next part really gets me going. So, Danny was offered a plea deal that stated that if he confessed to the murder of Jacob Wetterling and showed police where Jacob's body was, he would only be charged with 1 count of child pornography, which carries a maximum sentence of 17 to 20 years. And the Wetterling family agreed to this because I assume that at this point it had been several years, so they just wanted closure. Danny's confession was very detailed, but before we get into that, I just want to shed some light on Jacob's family. So, the parents stated that every single year for Jacob's birthday, they would make him a cupcake and put a candle on it, hoping that one day he would be home to blow it out. They also always left the porch light on for him in case he happened to show up. So now we're going to get into what happened the night of the crime. Danny stated that on the night of the abduction, he he was driving around when he saw the boys riding home on their bikes. And he followed them back to Jacob's house. He told the police that after he told the two other boys to run, he handcuffed Jacob and put him in his passenger seat. He then drove away, and he said that Jacob began to cry, and he started saying, quote, "What did I do wrong? What did I do wrong?" End quote. Danny heard feet on the police scanner, and he told Jacob to duck down in the seat before heading back to Painesville where he lived. On the way, he told Jacob to get out of the car and undress. When Jacob complied, Danny S.'ed him before telling him to get back in the car after Jacob started crying and complaining that he was cold. I am going to spare the details of this assault, but the internet is free if you are curious. So, after this happened, he saw a patrol car passing by, and Danny assumed that this patrol car was searching for him and Jacob. And so, assuming this, after it passed, he panicked and he told Jacob to get out of the car again. He took out his pistol and attempted to shoot him without warning, but the gun jammed on the first time and it did not fire. However, it did fire the second time, and Danny left his body in the ditch while he drove home and thought of what to do. I cannot imagine how scared this poor little boy was. This just breaks my heart. So, after a while, Danny drove back to Jacob's body and he brought a shovel with him. But after failing to dig a hole, he stole a bobcat from a construction site nearby, which he used to dig a hole and bury Jacob's body. When he realized he forgot to bury the shoes with him, he tossed them into a ravine and returned the bobcat and left. However, the next day he returned and he actually moved Jacob's body to a nearby cow pasture, which is where he led the police when they were caught. This is where he led the police when he was caught. The police brought a metal detector because Jacob's red jacket that he was wearing when he went missing had metal buttons on it. But they ended up not having to use it because red fabric from Jacob's jacket had been poking up out of the dirt. And it had been poking up out of the dirt the whole time. So for decades, it was right there and nobody saw it. So, unfortunately, Danny received the plea deal and was only sentenced to 20 years in prison. And that is the end of the case. This makes me so sick. First, he got away with it for 27 years, even though he'd been assaulting little boys several times. And some people argue that Jacob would still be alive if that patrol car hadn't passed. But I guess we can't really think like that. It's just so heartbreaking. He was only 11 years old, and the sicko not only got away with it for almost 3 decades, but he only got 20 years in prison. Now you all know me, and you all know that I do not advocate for violence, but it's only been about 9-10 years since it was solved, so I think people should know. But I will leave it at that. Feel free to leave your true crime case suggestions in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see